everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or evening. We are really thrilled to have our guest here today. Moritz Haidle is the third generation of his pioneering family to grow and make wine in Württemberg's Remstal. His grandfather, Karl Haidle, was the first to estate bottle wines in a region really synonymous with co-ops at the time. Today, Moritz, who took over from his father, Moritz, was it 10 years ago?
9 years ago.
9 years ago. And his team farmed 20-ish hectares with a focus on historic parcels, especially the Pulvermacher, with Riesling and Lemberger as the focus, plus a few regional treasures that they shine a spotlight on. Farming is biodynamic. They've been Demeter certified since 2020. Vinifications are old school. And to me, what is so exciting about these wines is that they speak so clearly and deliciously, both of Moritz's personality and of place. And I think as you're about to find out, Moritz is not only one of the most reflective and thoughtful and articulate winemakers out there in German and English, but also one of the most creative and fun. So we knew that when we had a chance to get him on as guest number one for TRINKTalks, we had to go for it. So Moritz, thank you so much for being with us today. And maybe we can start off by saying, that you are, make no bones about it, you are super proud of being from the Remstal, which is a place that I think probably most of the people who are listening in today will be familiar with, but for those who are not, might need a little explanation. How would you explain the Remstal to a wine lover who has never been there, and what is it that makes you so proud of it?
First of all, thank you for having me today. I'm proud of the Remstal, but I think it's more for personal reasons, because I think the wine area is beautiful, the wines are good, but I'm also a bit upset with my home region because we don't really have a profile, and that's the main thing that I'm missing. But besides that, I love it because we have beautiful hills. We are very close to the city of Stuttgart, and since I'm not a classical farmer, maybe I love to live close to the city, because I used to grow up in the hip hop scene, and that's why I couldn't imagine living on way out on the country. So I'm happy to be close to Stuttgart, but at the same time we have a beautiful landscape and delicious food. Swabian culture in general is delicious, and that's why I'm proud of the Remstal, I guess.
Super. Paula, you want to go in with your next question?
Yeah, I think it actually ties in really well to what you were saying before about the sort of lack of a defined profile. Württemberg has been described in the last few years as one of Germany's most dynamic wine growing regions, but the region itself is known for being somewhat sleepy and conservative. Where do you feel this energy is coming from, and why is it coming now? What's changed, or what is changing in your opinion?
I think there is a German saying: Konkurrenz belebt das Geschäft.
Competition keeps things alive.
Yeah, thank you for that. The world is still good, because the consumption of wine and alcohol was 3 times higher compared to the average of Germany. And so people were drinking a lot of wine, and they were mainly drinking local, from local producers. And so most of the wine producers in Württemberg were selling direct to consumer. And that has changed within the last 15 years. We went close to the average of Germany. People don't drink that much alcohol anymore, and they also drink more international now. We have lost a big part of the market. And so now a lot of wineries are struggling to sell their wine, because they are not used to doing export, and they are not used to sell the wine nationwide. That's the reason why a lot of producers have to think about their way of working and of their way of marketing and the whole strategy. Because so far, most of the producers, like our own winery, we didn't really have a strategy in the last years because there is a lot of pressure now on the market. I think that's the reason why the region of Württemberg needs to become more dynamic, but there is still a big part sleeping.
Just
That's really-
one quick follow-up question, if I could, Valerie. Do you find that it's different what's being consumed domestically, or at least regionally, than what's being consumed internationally, especially since the international story is relatively new from what you're saying in the last 15 years?
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of producers also producing natural wine, but not many people drink natural wine in Württemberg. At that point, it's still a small group of wine lovers who are interested in that part. And also, I don't know the political correct word for that, but Swabian people are tigers.
Frugal.
They don't like to spend a lot of money. More of the expensive wines, of the Großgewächs wines, are sold outside of the region. But even the region is actually quite wealthy. So there are also a lot of people drinking the expensive wines in the region because we have Mercedes-Benz and we have Bosch and Porsche. So a lot of industry and so there are wealthy people as well who like to spend money on wine. But the traditional wine drinkers in Württemberg like to drink the Viertele, which is our basic wine drinking tradition in quarter-liter glasses. Probably you need to explain that. I'm not able to explain that in English, to be honest.
Need to see your tattoo. Moritz has a tattoo of these Viertele glasses, which look like glass mugs, kind of like, there it is, two of them clicking together. It's a really fun tradition. I mean, it's great to go to Württemberg and have your Trollinger in a mug glass, and it just feels like it's very much part of the experience.
Yeah, but there you see it's more about it used to be more about quantity instead of quality, as the glasses tell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Moritz, can I also jump in with a follow-up question? To what extent do you think climate change is part of this shifting dynamic? I mean, in parts of Germany, it's true that climate change is making possible the quality that we're seeing now. But is that also the case for Württemberg? I mean, you are already a southern wine region with different varieties and a different profile for the wine. So how important has that been?
It's also important, but the main point about climate change in Württemberg is that, as I mentioned earlier, we don't really have a profile. So growers plant all kinds of varieties, and because of climate change, pretty much everything is possible now. It's tough to say, but we are still, I'm not remembering English words today, I'm sorry. For us, climate change is still, it's bad to say that, but it's still positive for us because we have less problems in general in Germany, even for us in the southern part of Germany, but we have less struggles to get the grapes ripe compared to my father's generation. But I think it won't take long until we also have a problem with overripe wines, which we already have, but it was just a question of getting used to that. That we were scared to do earlier picking, since we have learned that picking early is not a problem and we can avoid high alcohol. The wines are better, and we are getting used to the problems of climate change. But to be honest, I'm not sure if, I mean, we have a lot of organic producers now in Württemberg. But to be honest, I don't think it's because of climate change. I really think it's because of new strategies of selling the wine. I'm not really sure if organic winemaking would really help against climate change. I mean, we have to do something, but I think there are more important things than organic spraying, because it's good for the environment. I mean, it's better for the environment probably, but I'm not sure when it comes to climate change. I think things like lightweight glass bottles are, for example, are way more important for us compared to organic way of winemaking. But I'm sure there will be winemakers out there not agreeing with me on that.
I think it's a fair point. What do you think about things like composting? I mean, you've got some old vine Riesling in terraced sites, which are very difficult to work in, and you're obviously more prone to drought and heat stress because of their exposure and drainage. Do you find that your biodynamic farming practices do help there?
Yes, definitely. I think it helps. I think organic winemaking and especially biodynamic winemaking helps to work better in times of climate change. I think we have less problems because of that. I was trying to explain that we cannot stop climate change, but things like compost and also the terra preta. I'm sure you have heard of that. The
Biochar?
we burn wood and then the coal. It's not completely burned. It's not ash yet. It's just coal, and that has a we add that, for example, to the compost, and that helps to save nitrogen and in the soil, and it also helps to save water. Well, at least they say that it helps to. It helps the vines to save water. Water stress is the biggest problem that we have because of climate change. Or the organic vines in general have less problems with water stress because they are not forced to grow that fast, and they are not forced to grow that big and to have big grapes. And that's why I think organic vines can handle the water stress way better. And to answer your question, that's the main reason why I think organic winemaking is the winner when it comes to climate change.
Getting back to a little bit more about Württemberg and varieties there. Württemberg is historically famous as a red wine region, but not for the red wines that most people know. It's Trollinger as the lead variety, even though now Spätburgunder and Lemberger are very much in the running too. You are really on a mission to make the Remstal, or at least your estate, synonymous with Riesling and Lemberger, from great sites especially. Why and what is it taking to accomplish that? Do you feel like you are alone in that? Do you have, are other growers bringing a similar mindset? How is that transformation shaping up?
There is a few producers who also have are trying to get a clear profile and a small portfolio of only a few varieties. There is, for example, Jochen Beuer also focusing on Riesling, but there is also, for example, Lassac as the very young winery focusing on Riesling and Lemberger, also doing Pinot Noir. So I think in general, most of the growers also think that we need to have a smaller portfolio in general. Some of them are trying to focus more on Pinot Noir. Some of them are focusing on Chardonnay. Some of them are focusing, like I do, on Riesling and Lemberger. But when you have a look at the wine lists, you still see all kinds of varieties. And even in my winery, we still have Spätburgunder, Chardonnay, we still have Trollinger, Pinot Gris, and Pinot Blanc, and all that stuff. But I'm trying really to get rid of that. Some of my customers are really angry with me because I'm not producing their favorite wines anymore. It's hard to say for me in the region because I think that a lot of my colleagues are annoyed by me always preaching to focus on Riesling or Lemberger. And I would also agree on Spätburgunder, for example, because it also has a long tradition. It's probably more successful in the world than Lemberger is, because Lemberger is not that well known. For me, the reason for those two varieties was that Stetten, the village where we are located, is by tradition always has been a Riesling village. And my father always kept telling that 100 years ago there was almost only Riesling growing in the village. And so we also had already a big amount of Riesling. So I think when I took over the winery, we had 40% of Riesling growing in our vineyards. So that was an easy choice for me to focus on Riesling when it comes to white wine. And then the Lemberger was mainly because my father was very successful in the last 30 years in some awards. He mainly won awards with the Lemberger, especially in the Wiener magazine. He won, I think, 9 times first place in the German Red Wine Awards with his Lemberger. And so he was known for his Lemberger, and that was also for me the reason to focus on that. In the beginning, to be honest, I also had Chardonnay and Spätburgunder on my mind, but Chardonnay was such a small amount. It was only 2 parcels. So, and my parents, they love the old school Chardonnay style with 14.5% of alcohol and 100% of new oak. And in the first year when I took over the winery, everybody was really disappointed with my way of Chardonnay. So I didn't want to do that. And then I decided if what our customers expect and the way of my Chardonnay style, or the way I would like to do Chardonnay, I realized that there is so much in between that we will never come together. And so I decided that Chardonnay won't be on my focus anymore. And then with Pinot Noir, the problem was that I was working in a lot of Pinot. I was working in Burgundy. I was working in a winery at the Sonoma coast. And so I was in a lot of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay producing wineries, but my Pinot Noir never tasted like the places where I used to work at. And so I was always disappointed with my Spätburgunders or with my Pinot Noirs. But I was always happy with my Lembergers, and I didn't really know why, because I treated them more or less the same way. And then I decided, well, then it's Riesling and Lemberger.
Got it. Makes sense. Can I just ask, what are you doing with the varieties that you're not interested in anymore? Are you grafting over, or are you selling those parcels?
We have ripped them out and planted new vineyards. I mean, in the same vineyards, we planted new vines. We also recrafted them. Is that the correct word?
Yeah.
Or green grafting, maybe?
Okay.
That's a German translation. But we are also scared because we have more and more problems with ESCA. It's like some sort of cancer. And
Can you
we
explain
think
that? Can you just explain that for anyone who might not know what ESCA is?
ESCA is a disease. Is that the correct word?
Yes.
It's an illness or sickness. It's like some sort of mushroom that is growing in the wood, and it's killing the whole vine. Usually within 1 year. It's dead. When the color of the leaves is changing, you can already tell that it's ESCA. And if you try to cut the shoots early enough, then they might survive, but usually 2 or 3 years later, they still die. And we don't really know where it's coming from, but one of the theories is that it's coming from the wounds when you do the pruning, and that's how it's spreading. And so green grafting, you are also producing big wounds, and that's why we are not sure if this is a very sustainable idea. We haven't had bad experiences yet, but we are a bit scared. So we always prefer to plant new vines. But we also have some vineyards, or used to have some vineyards, that my father just planted a few years before I took over the winery. We just recraft the vines. And what we also did is pulling out the vines by hand and replanting them by hand. And last year I also quit on a few parcels that we were just renting in a different village. And there were only varieties that were not important for me anymore. And they were all quite steep and very small and very inefficient and not really economical. And so I just canceled the contracts and gave them back to the owners. But usually we pull them out and plant new vines.
Okay, thanks.
So it's very expensive actually to change to 2 varieties.
Let's see, just for timing reasons. What, if anything, have you learned from the natural wine movement? I know that's a bit of a complicated question and a complicated theme, but I think it's important. I'm seeing it more and more between a number of producers that the people are less interested in pegging themselves into one drawer. So what have you learned?
I mean, learning from natural winemaking is probably one of the biggest process, because making natural wine, I think, is the way that you can learn the most about winemaking especially in the cellar, because there is so many things that can go wrong, and usually in almost every other wine something goes wrong. My father already kept saying that every vintage at least one wine goes wrong. With natural winemaking, you learn a lot about faulty wines and where it's coming from and how to avoid that. And so I think you learn a lot more about winemaking because you have more experience. But from the scene, and I think that was the question, I made my first natural wine in 2014. Next year, that will be 10 years. At that time, it was not a big scene yet in Germany, and at that time, everybody was discussing if what's the difference between orange wine and natural wine. Orange wine is just skin fermented white grapes, but it's not necessarily a natural wine at the same time. I defined for me that natural wine is when it's not sulfured and when it's not filtered. Other winemakers out there thinking that natural wine also needs to be organic, which for me was never the question because I already have been producing organic at that time. And so I never thought about that. Over the years, I have heard that more and more natural wine producers are also using sulfur, but really just a small amount. It became difficult because then sometimes I don't really understand the difference between natural wine and normal wine, because if we are talking about normal wine, most of the producers that I know who are not natural wine producers, they also just use a small amount of sulfur. I don't want to say bad things about the natural wine scene, but I sometimes have the impression that some of our colleagues are telling that they are making everything different, but it's actually not that different anymore. The problem in the wine industry in general is that we are all just making wine. Sometimes some of our colleagues have to explain what makes them special to be special. I mean, some of them have to explain the people that they are doing things different just to explain that they are special. But in reality, the things are not that different. I'm struggling with my English to explain what I'm trying to say. And it's a really complex topic to talk about.
It is, but you're doing a great job.
Yeah.
It's a lot of what you were talking about before about making sure sharpening a profile, not muddying the message. I mean, it makes sense with what you're saying, coming up with clear definitions that everybody can understand and then abiding by them. Valerie.
I'm not that conservative. I don't want to have rules in winemaking. I don't want to say, for example, using less than 1 gram per hectoliter of sulfur is organic and using more is not organic. I'm annoyed, or I'm getting bored when winemakers tell me that they are so natural and not using anything. And I have one friend who actually had a cool idea. He made a wine called Unplugged, and the idea was not using electrician energy. He wasn't using any pumps, so everything he did by hand and with buckets and with a pellet jet. He was lifting the tank and using gravity and stuff like that. You can still use sulfur.
Acoustic with sulfur.
I really like that idea. And I agree. This is such a perhaps unnecessarily divisive kind of conversation because, I think if I look at the wines that you make and I look at the criteria for inclusion in the big natural wine fairs, I mean, you meet all of them, but it's really a question of your own perception. That's part of the aesthetic of it, but is that really what's central? I think the sorts of ideas that you're talking about are really the decisive ones. So I'm glad to get that perspective.
If your winery is too big, or if you are too successful and too famous, for example, you cannot be an authentic natural winemaker anymore. I only know two wineries that have a really big amount of wine that are accepted in the natural wine scene. And natural wine is the new word for what maybe 10 or 20 years ago used to be garage wine or garage wineries. It's more or less the same. It's not really about the winemaking process anymore. It's more probably a feeling or a lifestyle. I think it's bad if we tell people that using sulfur is a problem, or I think it's bad if we tell people that we are not using any chemical products. I don't need to talk about it because I think if I tell people what things can be used in winemaking, then I make it bad for the whole industry. Maybe you can find better words to explain what I'm trying to say.
Our previous conversation, and I'll just sum it up super quickly because I'm looking at the time here as well. But just that if we start putting calling too much attention to all the things that can be bad about wine, then we kind of paint with too broad a brush, and then everybody gets turned off of wine. And at a time when people are reconsidering their choices around alcohol generally, maybe it's just better to really put the energy into what we all love about wine and try to keep that conversation a little bit more universal.
Just one thing. Sorry. I think even if you're drinking industrial wine, it's still a more natural product than gin tonic, for example. Even if you're drinking the worst wine, it's still quite natural compared to any other beverages out there.
Yes, that is really true. Well, we've gotten some really good questions in on the chat that we'd love to share with you. I don't know if you can see them, Moritz, or if it's better if we read them out to you. I just want to be sure I don't miss anything. The first one I see is from Bart, and he's asking what you check before harvesting. Is it acidity or sugar? He's heard from Kaiserstuhl vintners that they don't check sugar anymore, just the acidity.
Sugar and acidity are both very important and the things that I'm trying to look up. And there was a time, especially like in 2015, where we had a really hot summer and a dry summer, and everybody said that Oechsle or sugar is not the point anymore. We have to check the acidity. But now with a bit more experience with hot or warm years, I have experienced that sugar for me is still easier to measure because I have my refractometer in the vineyard, and it's not possible to check the acidity with that. But I'm less scared of lower sugar amounts. And for me, especially when it comes to Lemberger, it's more about the structure of the berries. I want them still to be full and not soft. I want a Lemberger, when I'm biting the berry, I want the berry to pop off. And that's for me more important. And in sometimes when I'm really insecure, I also take some berries and bring it to the lab to check the pH or the acidity. But it's much more complicated to get those analysis. And so I'm still relying on sugar, but on much lower sugar than we used to do that, than we used to 10 years ago.
Interesting. Okay. Karen asks, since you're not selling as much locally, what are your main export markets and how's that going?
Well, one of the export markets is the USA, but we became much more successful in Scandinavia in the last years. And it's interesting. I have just heard the other day that German wine in general is now at the same level like French wine in Scandinavia, by image and also by consumption. So this is a big success for us. But it always depends on where you have good importers. I'm really successful in the Netherlands and in Spain actually, and I'm really proud of Spain because we are selling a lot of Lemberger. And the best effect is actually when I tell people in Germany that I'm selling Lemberger to Spain, then they think that they can trust my red wines, because usually Germans don't think that Germany is a good land for wine. And when you tell people that you are selling wine to Spain, then everybody is excited.
I think that's it. Paula, do you see anything else in there that we need to?
I don't see anything much. Don left a wonderful comment.
Oh, and he's asking who Moritz's US importer is, and that's Schatzi Wines. Nationally, right, Moritz? That's for the whole US. Moritz is heading out for his evening. So to let you know where you can find Moritz's wines, I've dropped 3 links into the chat for everyone to see. One is to his website, and there's a web shop there, and I've highlighted his estate wine Riesling, which is kind of Moritz's signature wine, and maybe he has just a minute to tell us about that. But I've also dropped in a link to our partner at Flatiron Wines here in New York, which is sell and ship that wine pretty much anywhere in the US. So if you're interested in tasting a sampling of what Moritz's wines are all about, that's a really good place to start, and then go right up from there, because Moritz makes 7 Rieslings, is that right? So, and of course the as well, but we'll have to get into it. And I dropped a shameless self-promotion, a link to an article that I wrote about Württemberg Riesling, where Moritz was kind of the star of the show. So as subscribers, you have access to that. But Moritz, tell us just a tiny bit about Riesling and where people can find and follow you before we say goodbye.
Riesling is just a wordplay of my nickname, because my nickname is Ritz, and then the variety Riesling, obviously. And it began as my first wine project when I was still at university. My father gave me my first parcel to make my first own wine, and then I called it Riesling. And then a few years later, I started to use that as our Gutswein name. And it's an easy drinking everyday Riesling, where I still think it needs to be well structured and kind of creamy. So it's usually a big part, usually about 2/3 is in big old oak barrels. And we are using barrels that some are still from my grandfather, so very old oak barrels. And then I'm trying to keep it on the lees until bottling, so it's getting more structure, and it's not very on the fruity side. So it's still a serious kind of Riesling, but for everyday drinking.
And where can people find you and see what you're up to?
Probably the best way at the moment is Instagram. I'm not really using Facebook anymore, but you can find me on Instagram or on our website. You mean in the shops?
Well, no, I think that was good. And your handle on Instagram is Riesling, right?
Yes.
At Riesling,
like the wine.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us, and especially you, Moritz. We really appreciate the chance to get to hear directly from you. And thank you everyone for being subscribers and engaged members of our community. It means so much to us. And feel free to drop us a line if you have any questions about accessing Moritz's wines or anything else. And if you have other winemakers you're interested in hearing from, we'll certainly do our best to get them on this platform. And wish you all a beautiful day and evening.